Now we're going to turn our attention to Formula One because it's interesting just now, to say the least. The first 60 seconds of the British Grand Prix at the weekend delivered one of the most thrilling starts, I think, in Formula One history, you would have to say. Here is the brilliant, and they were brilliant, this is a tour de force of commentary as well as driving. Here is the Sky Sports team of David Croft and Martin Brundle.
And it's lights out and away we go. Once again, Max Verstappen gets a decent start. Not as good as yesterday. Hamilton is right with him. Leclerc is already ahead of Bottas. Verstappen's ahead of Lewis Hamilton. Going through the second turn. It's the Red Bull, but Hamilton's coming back. Into Village we go. It is Verstappen from Hamilton. Then Leclerc, Bottas and Ricciardo ahead of his teammate Lando Norris.
Verstappen's going to have to weave like crazy. Hamilton got a better drive off the loop. He will be faster down the Wellington straight into Brooklands.
Not going to get a chance to weave because already Hamilton is with them. They almost touch. They go into Brooklands. Verstappen stays ahead. The crowd roar their approval for this. The two championship contenders giving it everything.
It's not over yet because Hamilton gets another slipstream all the way down the old pit straight into Copse Corner. These are critical corners for this Grand Prix.
Hamilton's going to try again, this time on the inside. A continent touch. Verstappen is out of the race and that's a big crash into Copse. Lewis Hamilton and Max Verstappen coming together. Hamilton continues on. Charles Leclerc now leads the British Grand Prix.
Yeah, so extraordinary stuff, an extraordinary start. Verstappen out of the race, a 190 mile per hour collision with Lewis Hamilton. So all the team principals are linked via radio to the race director. In this case, it's Michael Massey. And as you might imagine, straight away, Red Bull's Christian Horner was not happy. He was straight on to him on the radio. Have a listen.
Michael, have you got a minute?
Hello.
Yeah, Michael, look, that corner, he was never anywhere near alongside. Every driver that's driven at this circuit knows you do not stick a wheel up the inside at Copse. You know, that's an enormous accident. And it was 100% Max's corner. So, you know, as far as I'm concerned, full blame lays on Hamilton, who should never have been in that position. So, you know, you could have had a massive, you know, accident. Thank God he's walked away unscathed. So I hope you're going to deal with it appropriately.
No, understood, Christian. That's why it's just gone up now that things have calmed down for a second as under investigation by the stewards.
There we go. So that was Red Bull's Christian Horner giving his tuppence worth. Straight away, naturally, the team principal of Mercedes was arguing on behalf of his man Lewis Hamilton. So Toto Wolff here, he linked in with Massey and he explained that he had sent an email with a diagram which apparently proved Hamilton's innocence.
Michael, this is Toto.
Go ahead, Toto.
Michael, I just sent you an email with the diagrams where the car should be. Did you receive that?
Toto, I don't access my emails during a race deliberately because I concentrate on the race.
Yeah, then you should maybe look at this because there is something with the rules. I'm coming up.
Toto, feel free to go upstairs and see the stewards directly.
So that was Toto. By the way, how good is all this? I mean, football can't even sort out VAR, and here we have like full-blown drama in the middle of this race. It's amazing. So Hamilton goes on to win the race for the 8th time. He is, of course, the 7-time world champion, winner in 08, and then the last 6 championships in a row. And that win for Hamilton, despite the 10-second penalty which he received for his part in the incident, that win meant that Verstappen's lead in the championship suddenly slashed from 33 points down to just 8 points. And Mercedes as well cut Red Bull's lead in the constructors' standings to just 3 points, so down to just 3 points as well. Like I said, Hamilton received a 10-second penalty for his part in the incident. So after the race, here is Hamilton, the defending world champion, talking to Sky's Rachel Brooks.
What a roller coaster ride of emotions. A lot of anger after the shunt with Max, and then
what was that anger?
Had to bury it and just progress forward, you know.
What was your anger?
Huh?
What was the anger?
I just don't feel like he needs to be as aggressive as he is. And, you know, we're going down to turn 6 and there's bumping wheels with me, you know. And but it's cool because there's footage of old Formula 1 great drivers bumping wheels in a straight. And so I'm sure it looks cool and everything. But I tried to give him space. But I was quite a long way up in the inside into 9. And none of us backed out. And that was the end result. But I took the penalty, of course, and it's never one person's fault. It's always a balance of the two. I don't feel anything now. I just channel it into my driving, which I did, and I'm so proud that I was able to do that in front of the crowd.
Emotions are running high at Red Bull. Christian Horner's been pretty outspoken in his response to it. Yeah, and I get that because obviously his driver's in hospital. You know, it was a big shunt, 50G shunt for him. Does it take
I didn't know he was in hospital.
Yeah, he's in hospital now. Just precautionary checks. It's never how you want a race to play
Absolutely
out.
not. Absolutely
And
not.
therefore, does it take a bit of the shine off it for you knowing that?
Honestly, no, it doesn't. This is racing, and of course I would love to be able to race and for us to leave one another space, and there is plenty of space on the track for us to get around and manage for a long time without colliding with someone. But when someone's just too aggressive, these things are bound to happen. And there's not a single driver here that doesn't know how aggressive a driver could be. And yeah, there's not really much more for me to say. I hope he's okay, because of course I would love to have a wheel-to-wheel race battle for the whole race. I enjoy racing with him, and I'm looking forward, but I would never back down from anyone, and I would, naturally would not be bullied into being less aggressive. I think today, this weekend, we needed the points, and there was a gap. He left a gap, and I went for it.
So that was Lewis Hamilton. Verstappen is okay, by the way. He was taken to hospital, but he was released that evening. He had a CT scan and some precautionary checks and a bit of stiffness, a bit sore, but he's okay. Final clip for you then. We heard the Red Bull team principal Christian Horner on the radio straight after the incident. Needless to say, after the race, when he spoke to Sky's Ted Kravitz, he was still of the opinion that Hamilton was way in the wrong here.
Down here with Red Bull boss Christian Horner. Well, Christian, what can you say as the boss of your team today? I mean, is that just the way motor racing goes sometimes?
Well, it shouldn't be like that, to be honest with you. I mean, Max has incurred a 51G accident. Lewis Hamilton is an 8-time world champion. He shouldn't be making manoeuvres like that. It's unacceptable. He's put a driver. Thank goodness, the biggest result for us today is that he was uninjured. He's having to go to hospital for precautionary checks after, a 51G accident. So, I hope Lewis is very happy with himself.
Well, yeah. I mean, what about it did you object to?
Yeah, well, he stuck a wheel up the inside in a corner that you just know you don't do that. You just don't stick a wheel up the inside of Copse in that corner, in that circumstance. He was nowhere near ahead. It was contact, left front to right rear. And the speed that they're travelling is one of the fastest corners in the championship. And, Lewis has got more than enough experience to know that that's unacceptable. And, I hope he's, as I say, I'm just very disappointed that, a driver of his calibre, should make such a move as that. It's dangerous. He's put a competitor, it looked desperate, and he's put a competitor, thank goodness, uninjured, but he's put in hospital, getting himself checked out. So anyway, there we go.
There we go indeed. Red Bull team principal Christian Horner there, waiting patiently. Rebecca Clancy from the London Times. Hi, Rebecca.
Hi, how are you doing?
Very well. How good is this sport right now?
Oh, that was a brilliant recap. I really enjoyed listening to that. It was such a good race, wasn't it? It was so controversial, lots of drama. I mean, we have to say the most important thing is that Max Verstappen is okay, but it was an absolutely brilliant British Grand Prix.
The Drive to Survive producers are just sitting at home saying, you're making our jobs too easy here.
I know, it was funny. I saw the guys at the weekend, actually. I was at the race and I was walking through the paddock and I saw the Netflix guys and just big smiles on their faces thinking, thank you very much.
Episodes 2, 3 and 4 taken care of.
Yeah.
So Verstappen took to Instagram and described Hamilton as disrespectful and unsportsmanlike, and he said he was taken out by Hamilton. What was your read on the incident? The British Grand Prix stewards judged Hamilton to be, quote, predominantly at fault, end quote. Just how far over the line here was Hamilton in your view?
Barely at all, I would say. It's a really tricky one. So it was the first lap, which means all the cars are bunched up together on the track. There's not really many places to go. They're all fighting for position. And often on the first lap, when an incident like this happens, if wheels touch, the stewards normally deem it as a racing incident. I personally view it as a racing incident. Several of the other drivers have come out and they feel the same way. Fernando Alonso, Charles Leclerc, Mika Hakkinen, the double world champion, he came out today and said he thinks it's a racing incident. I thought the 10-second penalty, perhaps it was right, perhaps... if you look at the replays, you can see Hamilton was alongside Verstappen, but maybe he didn't quite turn into the corner as much as he should have done, but then he felt that he had the line. We are talking about things that happened in the blink of an eye. You know, it's all well and good. We can sit here and watch replay after replay after replay. But these guys are judging we're talking about millimetres here in no time at all, really. And so it was a really tricky one. I would err on the side of racing incident, but if I was Hamilton, I probably wouldn't be too aggrieved by the 10-second penalty, which actually, surprisingly, he wasn't, which sort of makes you think that maybe he thought that he was ever so slightly in the wrong, sort of 51-49% in his direction. So he gets quite grumpy normally if he gets a penalty and he doesn't think it's fair, but he didn't on this occasion. Obviously, he went on to win. But when he was told about the penalty over the radio, he certainly wasn't grumpy about it. He just said, OK, let's get on with it.
OK, because Red Bull are seriously aggrieved. I saw Toto Wolff as well afterwards. He was saying there's a rule in Formula One. Toto Wolff obviously have Mercedes team principal. There's a rule in Formula One that if the front of your car is more than halfway along the other car, then it's your corner. And Lewis was much further ahead than that, so the other driver should have left him some space. So again, on the face of it, you hear Toto Wolff there and you think, well, that's a compelling argument. But again, like I said, Red Bull so aggrieved. For instance, Max Verstappen's father, not a disinterested party, I grant you, but he did race in 106 Formula One races himself. He said it's really unacceptable what Hamilton did. Max gave him space and was in front of him. You cannot overtake on the inside of Cop's corner. A 10-second penalty is ridiculous as far as I'm concerned. They should have banned him from the race. So you have two obviously very entrenched parties and then a bunch of people in the middle saying, well, maybe that's just racing, a touch of negligence on Hamilton's part. I know Red Bull are considering an appeal, which could result in points deduction or even suspension from the race. How likely is a Red Bull appeal to be successful, do you think?
So I spoke to Christian on Sunday night and he sort of mentioned it in passing. I don't really think they'll go ahead with it. He wasn't even completely convinced that it was worth their while, really. One thing that Michael Massey did say on Sunday night, and one thing the FIA have been very, very strict on, the governing body who hand out these penalties, they say that they do not judge an incident on the outcome. So just because Max Verstappen ended up in hospital as a result of them coming together doesn't mean that the penalty should be any harsher. They simply judge it on the instant as it happened in that split second on the track. And if you judge it like that, I don't think Red Bull have anywhere to go, really. I think 10 seconds was appropriate for what happened. OK. And on Verstappen's point of Hamilton taking him out, I wanted to ask you how in control of the situation Hamilton could possibly be. Like, I presume once you come into contact with another car at that speed, at that corner, there's a distinct chance you'll not just take Verstappen out, but you'll take yourself out of the race as well. And this is obviously not a situation whereby Hamilton, it's the final race of the year and he's got a healthy lead, so if he takes them both out, he wins the championship. Hamilton needed to stay in the race as well. Or is there any way that he would have known that that type of collision would have just resulted in Verstappen going and not Hamilton? No, you're right. We've seen it in the past, haven't we, as drivers who take out their championship rivals to win a race. It's not the most, sadly, uncommon thing. When they do that, they do it in the full knowledge that they're taking themselves out as well, and that's how they end up winning the championship. If you can imagine driving at 100 miles an hour and trying to hit a car, your rival, let's say, with, a pinhead target, getting it right while travelling at that speed, in the hope that you take them out without taking yourself out, it's basically impossible. There is no way that Hamilton could have judged to make contact with Verstappen without having done damage to himself. It's remarkable, really, that Hamilton didn't go out of the race as well. And actually, because the race was red flagged after the collision with Verstappen, Hamilton had damage on his car, but the race was stopped almost immediately. But Hamilton, by that point, had already been called into the pit without that. And if the race had just continued and the red flag wasn't necessary, which had been brought out because there was so much damage to the tyre wall that Verstappen had slammed into, Hamilton probably wouldn't have actually been back in the race. But it was only because the race was stopped that the mechanics were able to fix the car and send him back out again. So he wasn't doing himself any favours in this either. What Red Bull... On Sunday, there was a lot of emotion, as you can imagine. Christian Horner was probably more than a little bit concerned about his driver. You know, they've spent a lot of time together. It's quite a sort of father-son relationship. His man was in hospital, and that's quite a frightening prospect for Horner. There's also the added tension as well that, quite frankly, Mercedes and Red Bull, they hate each other. And Toto Wolff at Mercedes and Christian Horner at Red Bull, they don't particularly like each other either. And it's kind of been bubbling for a while. And this incident we saw has just tipped it over the edge. And we're sort of getting the real, well, as you say, I can't wait to watch Drive to Survive. We'll get the really what happened on in the background. But yeah, we're really getting to see now these relationships, and that it's not just about the two drivers, and it is about the two teams as well.
And why don't they like each other, the two team principals?
They're very different people, that is certain, but they also come from two different, well, they want their own teams to win, really. When Red Bull were winning the 4 championships between 2010 and 2013, they were dominating the sport. Sebastian Vettel was their man, and then suddenly Mercedes come in. They've got Toto Wolff at the helm, and ever since Toto's been in charge, Mercedes have won every single championship since 2014. So there's a bit of, you know, professional rivalry in that sense. But also, you know, we all have colleagues that perhaps aren't our favourite people, shall we say? And we all have rivals, and we all, you know, that's just the way it goes with life. But if you can imagine, within the tension and the pressure of elite sport at this level, that heightens every emotion. And so they just don't particularly get along, and that's great for us.
Just to give people a sense of where this Hamilton-Verstappen rivalry is now. So Hamilton we're obviously pretty familiar with. 36 at this stage. He has his 8 world titles. He's...
7. He's going for 8.
Going for 8, excuse me. So the last 6 in a row...
No, Christian said 8.
Did he? Okay, that was an interesting Freudian slip on his part. So he's won the last 6, and he won in 08 as well. And Verstappen, son of Jos, as we mentioned, who was a teammate of Michael Schumacher's. Verstappen has been the coming force for quite some time now, and the great hope of Red Bull. He was 17 years of age when he made his first Formula One debut, when he made his debut in Formula One, which was a record. He was 18 years of age when he won the 2016 Spanish Grand Prix. That was on his Red Bull debut as well. And we've seen other drivers get into that Red Bull car and feel a bit nervous, but he won in his debut. So that was an announcement in many ways. And here he is, a couple of years on, 23 years of age, 15 wins, 50 podiums. And the progress has been very steady. 2017, 6th in the Drivers' Championship. 2018, 4th. The last 2 years, he's finished 3rd. So Hamilton will have known for a number of years, I presume, Rebecca, that this guy is coming for him.
Yeah, absolutely. We've all had an eye on Verstappen for quite some time. He is quite the talent. I would say comfortably that Hamilton and Verstappen are the best drivers of their generation. And what we are witnessing now is, because regulations have broadly stayed the same, it obviously naturally closes the gap as the other teams catch up to Mercedes. And so Red Bull have finally given Verstappen the car that we've all been longing for him to have, which means he can finally take the fight to Hamilton. But if you think about it, really, as you mentioned, he was only 17 when he first stepped into a Formula One car. He's still only 23, and he's in his 7th season. So he has plenty of experience under his belt, but he's still quite a young driver. And he has had it hasn't been a straightforward career for him. So at the start, he made a lot of mistakes. He's known, as Lewis said, to be a very aggressive driver. 2018, I think it was, the first 6 races, he made mistakes. And then at the 7th race in Canada, one of my journalist colleagues asked him about why he was making mistakes. And he said, if one more journalist asked me that question, I'm going to headbutt them. You know, he can be really fiery. In 2019 in Mexico, when Lewis was going for the championship at this point, he, as Lewis Hamilton puts it, he was torpedoed by Max and said, I knew this would happen one day because Max is so aggressive. All the drivers know that we have to give him more room than normal. So Max has been on the radar of all the drivers for a while, and certainly on Hamilton's radar. And we in the media, in the British media over here, we obviously, it's great for us because Hamilton's British and we cover him, and it's great for the sports. But we've known for some time, and we've said that Verstappen's probably his heir apparent, and he will go on and win championships, and he will go on and probably dominate the sport for quite a few years.
So this is that tetchy middle ground period where Hamilton's still young enough and Verstappen is good enough, and they're going to fight it out now for the next couple of championships. I was reading, and you probably remember this race, Rebecca, I was reading at, I think it was Imola, where they were tyre to tyre, and I think they brushed cars and Hamilton gave way, is what I was reading. Now, listening to Hamilton speak there after this race on Sunday, that sounded like somebody who was almost angry at himself that he had given away at Imola and had resolved never to do it again, come hell or high water, regardless of what was going to happen. That sounded like somebody who was like, okay, this kid's aggressive, and I let him away with one at Imola, and that's not happening again. That sounded like his mindset to me.
Yeah, no, I would completely agree with you. Actually, I was looking at the video of that yesterday for an article I wrote, and it was interesting to watch actually, because Lewis is known to be quite a fair racer. Obviously, he's aggressive. He's got 7 world championships. He's no shrinking violet. But as I said, Max has this reputation, and Lewis actually said on Sunday night that we played it in that clip, I won't be bullied into being less aggressive. If this is how Max is going to drive, then this is how I'm going to drive. And we saw it in Imola, as you said, and he had to concede, and Max went on and won that race. But we also saw it in the sprint race on Saturday at Silverstone, because obviously Lewis started at the front for a pole that wasn't pole in this whole rejig format that we had at the weekend. But for the sprint race start, Max had a very good start, and he managed to get in front of Lewis. And Lewis apparently felt at the time that he perhaps hadn't been aggressive enough to try and get back at Max. And I think that memory sat with him. And on Sunday, he just thought, I'm not having this anymore. And at this point, because Max had gone on to win that sprint race, the gap in the championship was 33 points. Now, that's more than a race win, and it starts getting to quite an uncomfortable gap at that stage for Lewis to try and claw back into. And he said on Sunday night, the gap was widening to a point I thought, this is actually going to take me quite a long time to close this up. But obviously with Verstappen crashing out and Lewis going on to win, the gap is now down to 8 points. So, yeah, it's a tricky one on this one, but I think Lewis won't be conceding anymore. The great thing is we've got another race in Hungary in 2 weeks' time, or less than 2 weeks' time now. And so they'll be back on track. I just have to say, Max will be checked over by the FIA doctor, but they will rule whether or not he is fit to race. It's very likely that he will be. That will be on Thursday next week. And so we'll see these two go at it again. And it'll be really interesting to see the approach that Lewis takes, because I spoke to Damon Hill about this yesterday, and he said to me that he's never seen Lewis be so aggressive as he was in that move with Max. So that's really interesting if we're going to see this fiery side of Lewis. And then this battle, as you said, this is going to go on for years, because the great thing that happened a month or so ago was that Lewis his contract was due to expire at the end of this year. And he's now signed on for another 2 years with Mercedes. And he said the reason he had done that was because of this battle that he's having at the moment. We've seen Lewis win championships in years gone by where, if we're completely honest, he's not really been challenged for them. We had Ferrari, Sebastian Vettel in 17 and 18. They got close, but the fight sort of fell away towards the end of the year. Valtteri Bottas, who is Hamilton's Mercedes teammate, he's a very good number 2 driver. He's a great wingman, but he's never really taken the fight to Lewis. This is the first time in this Mercedes that we are really seeing Lewis challenged for this title. And you always think, oh, of course they just want to win the championship. They don't really want to fight for it. They just want to go, and it's all about the records at the end. But Lewis is a racer. He's a fighter, and he wants to be battling someone like Verstappen, because of course the record books will show the numbers, but he wants to be remembered for having beaten and won championships and have good races. We look back at Prost, Senna, Hunt, Lauda, and these are the great rivalries that we remember. And I think Verstappen Hamilton is going to be one for the ages. Yeah,
it's amazing. That point about Hill not seeing Hamilton outside of his comfort zone like this and this aggressive before. I mean, I'm sure Hamilton is thinking to himself, I don't want to just be seen as the guy who waltzed to 6 in a row with the best car and then as soon as someone challenged me that I wilted. So there's a little bit on the line for him just beyond this championship. The 2 cars, Rebecca, the Mercedes car and the Red Bull car, I was reading Red Bull in particular, the last 5 races has had more speed. How do they match up at this stage?
The Red Bull definitely has more speed, as you say. It's got better race pace. They brought a new engine. Well, there's an engine freeze for this year, so the teams can't develop like they used to in years gone by. There's also a budget cap, which halts the amount of development that's happening. And on top of all of that, there's brand new regulations coming in next year. So a lot of the teams, including Mercedes, have put their focus on next year's car already, and so aren't necessarily bringing upgrades. Red Bull, however, have made the decision to focus on this car. They are obviously developing next year's, but they have put a lot of focus onto this year's car. And so in France, they brought a new engine, which was 4 races ago now, I think. It was the 5th race of the season. Lewis had won 3 of the first 4, and Mercedes were looking pretty good for it this year. Red Bull turned up in France with this new engine, and it hasn't been developed, but they have ironed out a lot of the bugs, so they're able to run the engine much higher, which gives them more pace. And since France, Red Bull then went on to win the next 5 races. So they look to have the better race car. And on Saturday at the sprint race, again, Red Bull looked to have the better race car. Even though Mercedes said they'd brought a few tweaks, it was more to do with aerodynamics. they didn't really seem to be enough to close the performance gap to Red Bull. So as it stands at the moment, Red Bull do look like they have the better race car.
Okay. One last wider point just to note when it comes to Hamilton. He is very much fighting for history. It's not just about Verstappen here. Hamilton and Schumacher, Michael Schumacher, are on 7 world titles. So another one for Hamilton obviously moves him clear, and he can say comfortably, whether people are like it or not, he's the greatest of all time. The other point which jumps out, just looking at the record books, I had a look earlier on. Often longevity is underrated, I think, when it comes to great sports people. So Schumacher's first and last of his 7 were 10 years apart. Fangio, 6 years apart from his first and his last. Prost was 8 years apart. Vettel, 4 years apart for his first and last. Jackie Stewart, 4 years apart, his first and last. Senna, just 3 years apart. Lauda, in fairness, 9 years apart from his first and his last. So Hamilton is 12 years apart from 08 through to last year and counting. So in terms of, I don't know, any dulling of the senses or fraying of the nerves, or just, you know, how difficult it is to be at your peak for a very long time, what Hamilton is doing here is extraordinary in comparison with history.
Yeah, it's amazing. And actually, he's my age, so it makes me not feel so old, which is great. It's really impressive. Hamilton's consistency has been remarkable. He has won a race in the 15 seasons that he has raced in Formula One. That is quite something to say. In many of those years, he certainly didn't have a good enough car to be doing that. He is able to outdrive what a car is able to do a lot of the time. His longevity doesn't, well, I'm not sure where the end is, to be honest. He said he's not going to race into his 40s. I believe him. He has a lot of interest outside of sports. And actually, this has been one of the key things as to why he's been able to continue for so long. When he was at McLaren, Ron Dennis was in charge, and he was quite a stickler, and he worked for racing was his life, and it was everyone's life. And if you worked at McLaren, then it was all about the racing. And it wasn't the case for Lewis. He had a lot of other interests. And if you think, he started racing when he was so young. He got picked up by McLaren, and as then they were powered by Mercedes when he was 13. And he's never really had a childhood, and he's never done other things. And as he's got older, in his late 20s, early 30s, he started discovering things like music and fashion. And so when he went over to Mercedes in 2013, one of the things that when Toto joined at the same time as him, that Toto focused in on was how to get the best out of this man who he had one world championship to his name at this point. They had obviously no idea what he was going to go on and achieve, but they certainly saw the talent. And one of the things about management, and great management, is working out how to get the best out of your employees. And Toto decided to give Lewis free rein to do whatever he wanted. So a lot of drivers' contracts, you're not allowed to do any extreme sports. You can't go skiing, you can't jump out of a plane. If you break a bone, it's very expensive for the team, and they just simply don't have the insurance for it. But we see Lewis, he's off snowboarding, he's got his place in Colorado, he goes skydiving in Dubai. He does absolutely whatever he wants. There was a moment in 2018, I think it was, where we were all flying out to Singapore feeling absolutely shattered, sort of 2/3 into the season, and he was in New York with the Tommy Hilfiger fashion show. And he then flew into Singapore on, I think it was the Thursday morning, and on Saturday set probably the greatest pole position of his life. But it's because he's able to have all of these outside interests, and because the team have allowed him to go out and do these other things, he's still so interested in racing. And when he talks about racing, you get the sense that he's that 13-year-old who just got snapped up, and it's all really exciting for him. And it means he still loves it. He's not bored of the racing because he's able to go off and do other things. And then he can come back to the one thing that he really loves the most. And it's a really interesting way of keeping him going, and it certainly worked for Mercedes.
Yeah, fascinating. Rebecca Clancy from the London Times. Brilliant to have you on. Thanks so much.
Thank